should have begun with that, but Fotolog was an image sharing platform.
Mm-hmm.
Notably, a bit like Be Real, you had one image per day unless you
One
had
image per day.
like
Paid,
exactly.
Yeah. But it was almost more fun to not pay. I think a lot of people did not want to pay because then it's
the constraint makes it fun.
Yeah.
And also there was a limit to the amount of comments you could get. And I talked about this book briefly in the piece I wrote for Digital Frontier, but Andrew Long and Nick Curry sort of catalog a lot of these amazing images from all over the world, but it was very, very popular in South America. You mentioned the cumbieros, but also the Pokémones and a lot of the amazing subcultures that really use the platform to commemorate, I think, a lot of the styles, the fashion, meet with one another.
Yeah, I think meeting was also a big part of it. Yeah.
Well, Amalia, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Born in 1989, Amalia Ulman is an Argentine-Spanish artist and film director.
Yes.
Second film now.
Yes.
Whose practice includes performance, installation, video, and net artworks. She is heralded as one of our finest observers of digital life, and Elle magazine crowned you with the term first rate Instagram artist. I don't know how you feel about that.
Not great.
Not great. Amalia, thank you so much for being here. We have a lot to talk about. Yes. Let's talk about how we first got to like talking online.
Well, I think I saw something about Fotolog in one of your videos, right? And I got excited because I'm very close to Fotolog.
Fotolog. It is actually not very known in America. So
absolutely not. And that's why I have this like sort of like in the past it would be like a hate relationship with it because I was very deeply embarrassed by having been on Fotolog. But now with the perspective and like being older, I'm like actually like, you know, I'm like kind of proud of my time in Fotolog.
So for those who don't know, what was Fotolog?
Well, it depends who you ask. I grew up in Spain. So like the meaning it had in Spain, especially around 2005 or so, is that if you were in Fotolog, it already meant that you were part of a subculture. Like normal people were not on Fotolog. Like it was mostly what now is called indies list or whatever. There was a big revival in the 2000s of bands that had been really famous in Spain in the 90s. So a lot of it was indie, electropop, etc. There were a few bands that were having their revivals, like The Mans, Family, Los Planetas. There's like, etc., etc., etc. New ones like La Casa Azul, and a lot of them were sort of like twee, indie, retro sort of, you know, aesthetics, and a lot of them like Super Puta were like really funny electropop, like silly bands. And I was a teenager. Most of these people were in their 20s. And I started Fotolog as a way of like trying to meet people, you know, that were into that kind of stuff because I grew up in a very like small town. Like obviously nobody in my high school shared the same interests. So it was a way to, you know, find people. That way I also learned like like it was all through photos, you know, so like I learned to like stage photographs and like started making my own clothes and all that stuff. And so that's how I remember Fotolog during like I would say like maybe like 3 years. That's what it meant. Then a lot of normies started joining Fotolog, and that's when it sort of died, you know. But yeah, it was an exciting time, especially for me because I was a punk when I was like 12, 13.
Your father was a punk, right?
Yeah. I grew up sort of in that environment, so it was kind of normal. But the thing is, all the people that I knew in that world that were very political, like tankies, you know, like and like with like actual punks who like then became like you know, like communist skinheads and all, you know, that mess that is all the same in a way. But and I don't know, I was a girl and I always liked wearing wigs, making my own clothes, like sort of thing. And that world was very like macho and homophobic and like, you know, and I always felt like that was not really my cup of tea. And then like it was very exciting time with like all these bands that were very queer and they're like doing it all themselves, and I felt more aligned to that. And that was sort of like the Fotolog culture in a way. It was more like arts friendly and gay friendly, and I felt way more comfortable with that than like, yeah.
Did you end up meeting anyone from Fotolog in
Yes.
person?
Yes. I would travel around. I would save my like I a friend of mine and I made clothes and t-shirts, and that was sort of my source of income in a way as a teen. And I used that money to visit friends, especially in Barcelona, which was huge for me because, you know, like I'm like from a small town, like I have
You're
like
from
Hicon, yeah, like no access to many things and like no money. And then I was able to like see older friends that were like in their 20s and had already gone to art school or fashion school or whatever, and like learning a lot of things. So it was like an exciting time, I have to say.
Would you say it had an impact on your art practice or even your application to like Central Saint Martin's or?
Yes, absolutely. Because uh it was a friend of mine who is still my friend. Shout out to Carlos Carbonell from the band Internet 2, who I love. And
Log user.
yeah. Well, actually, no, he was too sophisticated, I think. I don't remember. Maybe he was on LiveJournal, if anything. I don't know. Because from Fotolog, he went like the pipeline to like LiveJournal. You know, that was sort of what happened. He's like starting Fotolog and then LiveJournal, where there were more Americans and stuff. And that's how I met a lot of American friends, was through LiveJournal. Because Fotolog felt very like national, you know, like it was not, it didn't feel. But yeah, like I think it was people like that that like, or like there's like a whole world out there, like the net art in America, like especially like that generation of net art, like was sort of like doing very interesting things, and that was very like exciting for me, because that was sort of like the only thing I had access to, because I had very limited resources. So like anything that was like real, like the painting, sculpture, like that cost money to like, you know, like to buy materials, you know.
Look at the images. You couldn't go
Exactly,
and see them
yeah.
in person.
But also even to make stuff, like to me, like every time I try to do stuff, you know, it's like a lot of money, like for me, for like the resources that I had. But doing things digitally, like I was like, okay, I can afford this. You know, this is the kind of thing that I could be excited about. And yeah, but like the one thing I think like really marked me is that I did become sort of, in a very niche way, internet famous when I was very young, because I would post photos of myself. And I knew the kind of attention that I got. And it was very easy for me to get, I mean, there weren't likes back then, but like the comment, the 10 comments thing. And I even got to the point where like I got fan mail and whatever, and I didn't like it. And I think there was like a lot of internal misogyny within me. Like I wanted to be taken seriously. And as soon as I applied for art school, I deleted everything because I wanted to be taken seriously. And so I didn't have any internet presence pretty much until Excellence and Perfections, which was like a very like calculated thing. But I think that really marked me, because I was like, okay, I have these that seems a weapon, but that I don't know if I want to use, you know. And that's sort of like I had that experience very early on.
That's very interesting. I'm curious, at the time when you're seeing the response you're getting as a young woman on the internet, and you're seeing perhaps a different response your work is getting, how are you thinking yourself as a photographer at the time, or as a fashion design, like as a what
No,
was the
definitely not as a fashion designer.
what was the craft that you were hoping to be?
Photography.
Okay.
I think photography was it, because that's what I sort of started using like a self timer. No, but I think that that's what I was doing, but that's what I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be taken seriously as a net artist. I think like I got interested in that, and like that's why I removed myself from all the images and stuff. And like then I wanted to be taken seriously as a net artist, I guess. That's what like I was doing in art school, pretty much. But I think it was like, yeah, like that repressed and sort of like, I don't know. yeah, like I want to be taken seriously, even though my deepest desire was to perform, or like, you know, because I felt like there was such hatred for that, especially at the time, because it was like post-internet was very macho, especially at the time when I was in college. Like all these artists were like very broy, and so I think the idea of like theater or performance or any, like, it was very looked down upon by everybody.
And how was net art or post in that regard, specifically in London at that time?
Oh, non-existent. It was horrible. I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked when I got to London and people didn't have emails. I was like, because I had such a rich life online. And I guess the big mistake, I mean, obviously I probably couldn't have afforded it at the time. It was like, maybe come to America. That was, you know, but like I went to London, which I thought like, okay, this is the next best thing. I'm sure there's something going on. But I was shocked by like the lack of there was like only one person that I think was being like a net artist that was friends with a lot of American friends, and that was it. So like it was like really shocking to me. My first year was a nightmare.
The teachers probably didn't take to that.
No, it was like yeah,
where are the paintings?
yeah, exactly. It was really bad. Like teachers were like I would try to show the works in a computer, but that computer didn't have internet access. And they were like, well, if it doesn't work in this computer, then like you're disqualified or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but everywhere there's internet everywhere. Like just because we're in this basement, right? I don't know. It was just like very like yeah, butting heads all the time, and me discussing with them, because I worked in the library in St. Martin's, and we did have books on 90s net art. So I was like, this is not new. This has been going on for a long time. It's not I don't know. It was difficult. And I think it only like much
what year
later.
is this around?
2009. So it was booming in the US. And then like it took a long time. And like a lot of this like Americans were in Berlin and stuff. But like London took a second too, you know? Like I think by the time I was graduating, that's when a lot of people started. But by the time I was in school, I was in it's just very weird, like 4D department, because it was like 2D for painting, 3D for sculpture, and 4D was, I guess, time based, like I don't know, or like nothing.
Yeah.
Conceptual. It was a mess. I don't think it like I didn't learn much from it, but there was like a lot of, I guess, people that I was friends with that I shared most like affinities with, probably, or like doing video art with VHS. Which to me was like, this is like a weird retro aesthetic that doesn't feel contemporary to me at the time. And only later they started doing things like digitally, you know? So London was like in a weird, like a bit behind in a lot of that stuff.
So what was your progression in terms of online platforms? You start at Fotolog, you go to LiveJournal,
I leave.
You leave. You take a big hiatus, you know, it's like good beans in the desert or something.
Yes.
And then
you
come back in 2014 for Excellence in Perfection.
Maybe like I would say maybe 2012, I started posting again, but very like, you know, not in a hardcore way, just like a little bit. But I mean, I have to say LiveJournal was very useful for me to learn how to code. That was because like it allowed you to like, you know, change a lot of things. Like you had to learn a little bit of like HTML, and I was like nice that I learned because of LiveJournal. But yeah, I think the big issue was that I the reason why I go back online almost kind of like, you know, not really wanting to, because I was like, I know what happens after this. I know what happens after posting one photo. I know what like how they like I know how this works. I had a boyfriend at the time that was this twink that made a lot of work of him, like himself, like selfies and videos and photo booth videos and stuff, and he was always like, why don't you post, like you have to do it, why are you not posting selfies?
There's always a
like,
twink in your ear telling you to post at all times.
Exactly. And I'm like, no, like I want to be taken seriously, you know. I was like mostly just wearing men's clothes and like hiding in the shadows, and like And also I feel like there's something that comes with practice. Like I remember being very good at posing for photos, you know, and then like after not doing that for a long time, I had like, totally had lost it. I was like looking to, like awful, and I was like, damn, like it is. But then like I slowly, like they were like very like blurry, mysterious pictures and whatever, you know, but like very slowly it started taking off again, and I started getting, you know how it goes, like attention for the way I looked. Therefore, I started getting shows to show. But you know, I was like, okay, fine, like I'll take the. But at the same time, like it was pissing me off, and I think that's why excellence and perfection happened as a sort of like big fuck you to all the guys looking at the photos and like especially like art people, like older curators and stuff.
Yeah.
By being something that they sort of
Despise a little
despised
bit, you
and
know.
hated. Yeah.
Kylie Jenner feels kind of like
Yeah.
antithetical. Well, it's not Kylie Jenner, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah. No, exactly. Like,
mishmash
yeah,
of
any sort of. And I think that was me trying to being like, why do I have all this internalized misogyny? And why do I think that for be taken seriously, I have to like act a certain way? And since then on, I sort of, even though it was like an uphill battle, because, you know, like still today, like being a director and actor is like an uphill battle to be taken seriously as a woman acting in girly ways. But I think it's worth fighting that fight and still be taken seriously directing in a dress or something. You know, like I think it's like, yes, it might be harder, but down the line now I see that a lot of girls can look the way they want to and be taken seriously, you know, be taken seriously for their work. So that's cool.
Excellence and perfection. Excellence is imperfection is a 3-act durational performance on Instagram. It lasted about 4 months.
Yeah, something like that.
Which you scripted the whole thing. You have sort of these 3. Well, the same character goes through like these 3 phases from.
Well, they were like the most popular, maybe like girl trends at the time. So the first one is a bit more like anime. Okay. Like the first one is a bit more like cute anime leaning one. The middle one is the Iggy Azalea, like sort of like, and then the third one is like the post rehab
hippie
yoga goop.
Yes.
Whatever. Yeah.
And so people follow you on this path and are in very much in the tradition of like lonely girl or like completely captured and enraptured by that story. Everything seems very real. You are sneaking into hotels, taking photos. You're doing it's not.
For the record, I didn't sneak into hotels. I paid for the hotels and I spent a lot of time performing those hotels because that's something I want to. Because I don't know who said like I was sneak, and it's like you can't sneak into hotels. You can't sneak in hotels.
I did wonder because I think in one of the interviews it says that you sneaked in. So I was like, is she just asking someone, can I just use your room for like an hour?
Yeah, like it was a long process. Like, I mean, I don't know. Anyway.
Okay, let the record show. So you do this, and you know you do the big reveal that this was all been performed, and you wrote in a newsletter about this because you stopped sending your newsletter and you wrote, I wanted you to trust the images over everything else. I thought that was a very beautiful sentence. What does it mean to trust images?
Well, I think people do that all the time. And I think that's how, like, why we're in the situation we're in. I think because I was online so young, like so young, even before Fotolog, I was online too. And like, you know, I think I went online when I was 10 or something. And I don't know, I feel like there was like such a big I don't know, a generational divide about like what's true and what's not true and whatever. And I know that even a lot of published books are bullshit, but like even to get a published book, you'll have to go through like more like, you know, more hoops. But yeah, like I would like there's like so much bullshit published online all the time because like it just takes one person and that's it. And like I would see like how people were so trusting of everything, and And I feel like our culture is so image based that it's very hard for people to like have seen something and whether it's true or not, like to kind of like change your opinion about something. But also because people hate being wrong. I think there's like a very big problem with that too. It's like people hate the feeling of having been wrong, you know. I mean, like very few people are like, oh, I was wrong, apologies, you know. Like most people get really angry, they get like violent about it, whatever. And that applies to politics, that applies to knowledge, that applies to a lot of things. That and that's what I was sort of seeing and playing with, is the aesthetics of legitimacy. Yesterday I was writing something because I remembered out of nowhere, like when I was a teen, I did watch a lot of movies, like a lot of films. And one of the things that I remember, I had this book about Dogma 95. And as a good teenager, I was very like sort of interested in manifesto, because I feel like teenagers love manifestos, because manifestos are very infantile.
I have a Julian Rollsell's manifesto right now.
So, and then I was like remembering like how like I started having doubts about it at the time, because obviously it's impossible to do like the idea of like I'm more truthful because I'm not using a soundtrack, you know, which is like, yeah, but it's all about aesthetics. Like, yeah, it looks more real, but you're still editing this film. Like, it's not, you know, like, and I, you know, like there's a level of like that also happening in documentaries. And like, I think that's also by the time I was watching these films are from like the 90s. I watched in like 2005. They'd already had that, how is it, like patina of 90s aesthetics, which I was attracted to, not because of the realistic aspect, but because of the aesthetics of it, you know? So it was like, this doesn't really go anywhere. And that's why one of my favorite films by Lars von Trier was Dogville, because he was like sort of breaking with that cycle. But I think that influenced a lot of like my understanding of reality and like how you like present reality in a way, you know? And I think I always had that issue with Instagram being like an immediate representation of reality and like a truthful form, because obviously you choose what to show, etc. And that's like written in the Fotolog, Fotocumbia essay, you know.
In this Fotolog, Fotocumbia essay, you write that there was a competition for attention, this anxious ambition to provide entertainment and garner popularity through updates. Cultural capital manifests itself in virtual environment just as it does physically. Sort of identify this sort of anxious ambition rather. That was very salient in Excellence and Perfections. It's been 10 years now, 11 years. Have you seen this dynamic, this anxious ambition change over time?
I mean, I probably it's getting worse and more like corporate in a way. I mean, it's taken for granted now. I feel like a sign of privilege is not having to be online or, you know, performing all that stuff. But yeah, I feel like maybe 5 years afterwards, like, you know, there's like all these companies in China where like, or like girls getting funds together to like buy one handbag, and like, so all of them could pose. Or like groups of like 15 girls getting a hotel room so all could take photos, you know. I feel like I probably experienced that for the first time in Fotolog myself, because I had no money, and my apartment where I grew up kind of looked not great. And I was exposed to all these like Scandinavian photos and like all this stuff and kinfolk and whatever. I'm like, damn, my house looks like shit. I mean, and it was a lot about like finding the angles of like when the light was good in my apartment, how to like not seem that poor. And yeah, I feel like a lot of that's what later I like analyzing the Fotolog, Fotocumbia, which is like not about Spain, it's about like Latin America, but how that like were like the markers of class, you know, like in a lot of the photos, and how they're like concealed in the photos, and like how.
And that was also very visible, at least in New York, Williamsburg era, like to have like a very white space.
Yes.
You know, that cup, it was a marker. something as simple as the quality of the overhead light you had in your home also
Yeah, of
played.
course, especially in a place like Spain where like most houses have, how do you say it, gotele, you know, like splatter
Yeah.
walls and like, you know,
Yeah, plaster or whatever.
yeah, like
And it's not
it's
smooth.
like popcorn,
Yeah,
you know.
popcorn. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god, I had that in my house, and I was like, there's no way.
It's ruining the vibe.
But I was not the only one. I feel like anyone growing up in Spain, like most people are like working class, like, and even when we're growing up in Spain, you're like would not fit into that like straight on, especially in like 2005. I feel like maybe like 15 years later, there's like all these cafes, all these whatever, but like at the time, it's like everything still looked very much like Spain in the 90s. So I remember being very conscious of that, and I think that informed.
Tell me about Fotocumbia versus Fotolog. What was that distinction, and what was that platform, or the secondary platform made?
Yeah, so I want to give some like how to say I want to explain a little bit more now that we're switching from Spain to Argentina, because it's like a completely different thing. I was talking about a very sort of Euro aesthetics, Euro trash, electropop situation. Now we're like going to like Latin America. So Fotolog was mostly used in Latin America by what was called vloggers, and it was more like emos. And the thing with this, you know, this sort of tribe is that, yes, they were like listening to like electro music, and they were into anime, but they were like sort of look kind of emo as well because they had the hair, and they were kind of queer too. I think that was like also a big element, is that they were queer friendly, which in Latin America is a problem because it's very homophobic and like extremely violent against the gay community. And so that was a trend. But like most of these kids, especially in Argentina or Chile or whatever, they were white. They were like the, you know, a more like middle class or even like upper middle class or whatever. And you know, class differences in South America are like way bigger
Notable,
than in
salient,
Spain, you know. Like in Spain, like it's not like that. And it's like real violence, real, you know, murders, kidnappings, etc., etc., etc. And there's a lot of people, and more and more and more, because a lot of them are like immigrants from other places, Latin American stuff, and that live in the slums. And the slums bigger, bigger, bigger. And a lot of them, like the most famous one, for example, in Buenos Aires has their own McDonald's. That's how big it is. Like it's, and of course, nobody that is not from the slums will go inside, you know, because like you'll get killed. So these people sort of felt like, yes, they were excluded from this, like even though it was online and they had access to, you know, post on Fotolog, obviously there was like a big, big class divide. And like you could see that through the quality of the photos because they were using different cameras, but also the backgrounds of the rooms, all the stuff. You know, you had like the rich kids from Buenos Aires with the nice apartments, and then you were like in the slums with all the cables behind you and all that stuff. And in, at least in Argentina, people that live in the slums, there's this like pride, violence and pride, and about separating yourself from the rich people, like the white Argentinians. And that's done through music, through aesthetics and everything. And it's very, I mean, it probably happens in America as well, but it's about like really embracing all the things that those people would find offensive. So one of the things that they do, because they're like something that is tacky, is called grasa, like greasy. So like very greasy hair is part of it. And there was like a very important cumbia movement called cumbia villera, like cumbia from the slums, that a lot of the soundtrack for Magic Farm is taken from. And they're like especially using sounds that are like the ugliest sounds in a keyboard, like the silliest, ugliest sounds. That's what they make music with, because it's not highbrow, and like so they were embracing that. And what was funny is that like they ended up making their own bootleg Fotolog,
Mhm.
and which I find fascinating that they went all the way to code their own website to post their own photos. And obviously, because it was a bootleg version, it allowed for porn,
Yeah.
sexual images, chat room, and limited comments, which in the real Fotolog were like limited, to 20, I think 20 comments, and music. Also, you could add, music. And I don't know, I was fascinated when I learned that was happening, because it's like so much work had gone into differentiating themselves from Fotolog and the vloggers.
Yeah. So I should have begun with that, but Fotolog was an image sharing platform. Um, notably, a bit like Be Real, you had one image per day unless you had like the paid, exactly.
But it was almost more fun to not pay. I think a lot of people did not want to pay, because then it's
the constraint makes it fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also there was a limit to the amount of comments you could get. And I talked about this book briefly in the piece I wrote for Digital Frontier, but Andrew Long and Nick Curry sort of catalog a lot of these amazing images from all over the world, but it was very, very popular in South America. You mentioned the cumbieros, but also the Pokémones and a lot of the amazing subcultures that really use the platform to commemorate, I think, a lot of the styles, the fashion, meet with one another.
I think meeting was also a big part of it. Yeah.
And the third thing that I didn't know until I read your piece is this the Fotocumbia, which is, to me as like a technologist, an amazing step, because we always talk about what does it mean to build your own platforms, an alternative platform, because well, Instagram is not the best. We know kind of like where things are going, even from the ownership of some of these companies. Then so what is it? But we often don't do that, and so to see that happening in the early 2000s is just astounding. So I thought that was like an amazing vignette of technological independence made for and by a subculture.
Yeah.
Now there was a negative, not a downfall, but you kind of note in the piece that there was a commodification of the cumbieros aesthetic. You write, the only way for the cumbia vieira or the cumbieros to be accepted by the establishment was to lose their original meaning and become a commodified aesthetic.
Well, it's like everything, like it started in the fringes, then it became part of the mainstream, and it sort of lost its, charm in a way. But it's funny because like when Cumbia Villera started, I remember this was like 2002 or something. My internet in my household was a big deal because my parents were immigrants and we never had enough money to go back to Argentina as often as they wanted to. Especially my mom, she felt very isolated. She missed Argentina so much. Like she would hear something about Argentina and cry immediately, or like, just like, and I think that's a feeling that I think thanks to technology, we're missing more now, but like being an immigrant in like up to the 90s was very painful because you had to communicate through letters.
Those little phone cards.
And going to the locutorios, like sitting and like getting charged per minute, and being like, I'm sorry, I have to hang up because I can't afford more this call. Like, so like by the time that we got internet in the household, my mom sort of had this like manic episode, I would say now, where like she was like glued to the computer all the time, reading the Argentinian newspaper and just like sort of like not talking to anybody and just like reading Argentinian news all
immersing
the time.
herself
virtually. It was like really weird. And I remember listening to Cumbia Villera for the first time back then, and my mom loved it because she's like, it's like, this is so funny, like because the lyrics are very like funny. They're like, I mean, they're like disgustingly violent, but also funny and like, but obviously like the upper classes and the snobs hated it. We're like, this is like the purest trash, and like we hate it, and like we were against this and whatever. But it was funny, like I would say like 10 years later, then you had all the white girls from Buenos Aires with an ukulele doing covers of the songs, so it kind of like went all the way around. But I think that tends to happen with culture all the time, and like by the time, I think at the end of the piece, I mentioned how when it became more mainstream, then like that cumbia villera culture got absorbed by the vloggers, and they were like sort of role playing with the clothes of like the villeros, and like it's like this whole thing about authenticity and whatever. But I mean, that happens in America with rap, like
Yeah.
you know, like,
I mean,
it's like who's an authentic, you know.
The previous interview with Lena Bascal was about indie sleaze, and I feel like similarly now, we are sometimes cosplaying or LARPing specific eras that are, you know, a little bit misremembered. I'm curious about this commodification of aesthetics, because of course now it's more in the realm of, say, the specific culture, geography, or music. Do you think it applies also to femininity, like in sort of the broad Instagram landscape?
In what way? Like, what do you mean?
There is potentially an original meaning, and there's a specific aesthetic that is commodified. I think that you embodied through 3 different archetypes in that.
Oh, you mean that? Well, I mean, there's always archetypes, and there's many ways to being a woman. I think there's no one single way to, like, it's just like such a but yeah, I don't know. There's like, I feel like there's a level of performance to any sort of gender too. I think especially like, I feel like people tend to look at femininity because people are misogynist. And it's like, but there's definitely a lot of like masculinity role playing and like commodification of what it means to be a man. Like, it's funny because like when talking about like gender dysphoria and like, you know, like that not only happens to trans people, like everyone, I mean, maybe there's some people out there that never felt it and like good for them, but like everyone out there has felt some level of gender dysphoria, and that's why like so many men go to Turkey to get plugs, and it's like that happens. And you know, and like men take testosterone and like women take estrogen when they're going through their menopause, etc. That's all like connected. But yeah, I feel like that's something I always explore in my work, is like there are different shapes that it can take to perform a certain thing that has different meanings, and how you get, and how you can utilize that to convey a certain message, right? But what I like to do is sort of to like subvert that, or like think twice about what you're, you know, what's your first instinct. Maybe you're wrong. I think with my work, I've always tried to work with things that originally put me off, and through the work I ended up falling in love with it. Because I'm always asking myself why I feel a certain way about certain aesthetic. Like why do I think this is ugly?
Yeah.
I think maybe that's because I'm from like a lot of different places, so I know how like the same difference, the same thing can mean so many different things to like many people, you know. And I always try to put myself in that sort of uncomfortable situation of like why I feel like a certain way about this. How do I fall in love with it and change my
your aversion to appreciation?
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's a copy of Butler's Gender Trouble over there, and the idea I think behind is the questions is that if we are always in drag, as Butler says, what does it mean to have a stage, right, to perform that drag in a sense with Instagram and whatnot? You've used the term before, the electronic economy of looking good.
Yeah.
How was Fotolog a part of that economy?
Well, I think that was just like a very early example of something that is very normal now. And that, to be honest, makes me kind of sad, because I don't think everybody, which now is sadly the truth, I don't think everybody should be subjected to the pressures of showbiz. You know, like back in the day, people in showbiz went through all those pressures, and that's fine. But now you're a doctor and you're going through the same thing. Like you have to perform and it's like, no, not everyone needs to know how to perform for the camera, or I'm just completely opposed to it, because in my daily life, I'm pretty anti-image too. Like I spend most of my time being nonverbal with my animals and sort of looking very sloppy and like not thinking about any of these things. And
when you say anti-image, as from a consumption perspective, from a
yeah, like
production
I
perspective,
no, like I from a very young age, like I think I look at images in a certain way because it takes me a lot of effort. I'm autistic and it takes me a lot of effort to perform as a human being, you know, or present myself as like I'm aware of that. And most of my life I've lived in a very inward way where my life is richer than just images. I really enjoy many other things that are not like image driven. And I don't know how to explain it without sounding too like, but let's say I enjoy vibing with things without both images and language.
Yeah, like
And
almost like there's other senses through which you can have an experience, not just sight or speech.
So, and I really, really dwell in that, especially through animal communication and like dealing with animal like training and like so I've always been like, I think like most of my life has been that, you know. And then like for my work I do analyze images maybe from like such a weird perspective because it takes me a lot of effort, you know.
You've used the term middlebrow to describe the main protagonist in your work. What do you mean by that term, and how does it relate to contemporary social media?
I think I can answer this question by explaining why I wrote the Fotolog and Fotocumbia essay, for example. It's probably the first thing I wrote, like seriously, you know, like the first essay, whatever. And I love it. I was reading today. I was like, damn, I wrote this.
It's good.
but it did come from a very strange place. Because when I moved to London, whenever they would ask me, the Brits would ask me where I was from, whatever, and I said Spain, everyone would go, no, Spain, ugh. And I would always be like, well, I'm actually Argentinian, whatever. And they're like, oh my God, next time just say you're just Argentinian. Argentina is great. Of course it has, especially all these rich people, like their idea of Argentina is, you know, the ranch with the horses and stuff, which I've never had experience of that. But, you know, they were like, oh, the wine, the horses. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. I've never touched a horse. You know, it's like, so it was like a really uncomfortable situation. And I sort of started performing these sort of Latin Americans for the British because my own background was pure dog shit to them. Like my actual experience, which was very like Southern European Eurotrash, for them was of no value. It was just like, no. So thinking about making art and all that stuff, it was really like playing up the idea that I'm Argentinian, which yes, I am, but I also spent my whole life in Spain, in a place that is like very like traditionally working class, socialist, factory driven place. And that was the first and probably last work that I did that was like exoticizing myself and my experience. And then right after that, I did start making work about all the things that to other people were almost invisible and all the aesthetics of like the European working class, because that was fascinating to me, you know. But I had to like really put a fight against this sort of, it's like, you know, like Orientalism, you know, like they wanted something else. And I was like, I'm actually interested in shopping malls in Spain, you know, like, and like that sort of like blandness, boring middlebrow, you know. And then I met another artist, Bruno Zhu, that also through conversations with him, like that sort of encouraged that feeling.
When you say this, I think now of Planeta, and that makes sense now in that context.
Yes. And a lot of other works that I've done, like most of my favorite works even the video essays and the aesthetics that they use, or like the decals on the walls for like certain exhibitions and things like that, that all comes from European working class aesthetics. And I feel like I had a lot of misunderstandings, like when I did this Basel Statements installation with a lot of these elements. It's funny because like now there's a lot of girls like Gen Zers that love that aesthetic and have been making a lot of works with that aesthetic. But back in the day, especially surrounded by rich people, they didn't know where it was coming from. So the message was lost. And it was tricky because I was like appropriating a lot of these things that to me had a meaning, but to them, it had no connection with where it was coming from. And
it was a mere visual element.
yes,
some
instead of like, oh, this is why you get a I don't know, cheap hair salon.
Yeah.
Because they have no concept of that, you know? So I feel like a lot of those things were lost. And it took many, many years until now where I see a lot of like young, cool girls doing things with this sort of aesthetic. And I'm like, wow, it took this long for younger kids to see that as a cool aesthetic, which at the time people really didn't understand why I was interested in that.
Yeah. I suppose it takes a certain amount of time for aesthetics to transcend class, like to migrate.
Mm-hmm.
You did mention that there is one thing that transcends class. In 2014, an interview with Bullet Media, you mentioned that beauty is an asset that can transcend class.
In more or less painful ways, yes.
Do you still agree with that statement? And how does that play up now with your different sort of digital performances? Or
well, yes, but it doesn't come without its consequences.
Yes.
You know, I feel like I mean, I could take the example of my mother, for example. My mom is extremely beautiful and she grew up very poor. And her beauty was the one thing that sort of like took her out, but not without a, like huge levels of violence. Because I think that it's like this double bind where like women, I mean, and I went through the same thing, and other like peers of mine that were from like rich families never were subjected to any of these things. But like there is this thing where like if you're like from a poor background and you're like beautiful enough, you might be able to get out of that class system, but not without
cost.
A lot of violence also against your body, and like a lot of like
each asset has its liability, the liability of beauty.
So yeah.
Violence. Speaking of your mother, your first feature film, El Planeta, is about a mother and daughter duo. Your mother is in the film.
Yes.
How did that project come about?
Well, you know, I love making art, but then like the problem was that Excellence and Perfections became too big, and then there was this expectation of me to keep on making versions of Excellence and Perfections, especially by people that didn't really understand the meaning of the work, you know, which was that it's a work of fiction. And it's not, I mean, it's not self-feminism. It's not just, it's a work of fiction. Like it has a beginning and an end, it's scripted.
Yeah.
Like, and, but also there was like a lot of elements that were in it, like the costume design, the photography, the editing, the, you know, building of sets, the sculpture, all of that, that like was sort of like, you know, put aside because of me in the photo, you know. And so I was like, I don't know, like I started feeling more attracted to filmmaking, and it was through a friend that it was also like a artist turned filmmaker that I sort of saw the possibility of like, oh, feels like a fresh new thing that I'm excited about. And I learned about this story, this mother-daughter duo that were scamming people in Gijón. And to me, as an Argentinian, it seemed like a very cute story because this could never happen in either New York or Buenos Aires or any big city. Like it felt like such a provincial story of like these two women just like going around being like, I'm rich, and people going, okay. I was like, wow, that's so Asturias. Like, oh, you went to like a bakery and this like 80-year-old man is like, yeah, I don't know, I'll give them free pastries because they said they were, you know, rich, whatever. And I was like, that's so funny to me because, you know, I feel like this is like, in a way, it's like a very endearing story of like almost old Europe. That's just like of a disappearing Europe, like these like weird pockets, the weird towns where like nothing happens. So like to do a scam like this, everyone's taken by surprise, and you're like, okay, I guess, sure, like, okay, pay me next one. And
like just like the credit on faith, all that stuff. You know, doesn't
yeah,
exist in like a, you know,
yeah. To me, it
at
was also
Starbucks.
fascinating because as an immigrant, I would have never given the benefit of the doubt in
You would never
Spain.
trusted them.
You know, they would have never trusted me. Yeah, because maybe we deserve it, but Argentinians have a very bad reputation in Spain.
Okay.
It's like swindlers and stuff, which my father is sort of like a criminal, so maybe I don't know. Maybe it's true. But yeah, I think I had like this sort of fascination with that, and like my mother and I play very Spanish characters. The names are very Spanish names, and like her outfits is, I mean, she doesn't dress like that. It's like, you know, like she's like really portrayed as like very Spanish, like right wing person. And one thing that I've always been fascinated in Spain is that most people don't have, there's not much money around. It's like, you know, people have a good life because of a lot of nepotism, and like people protect each other and get, you know, but there's no money. Like, and even like right wingers who are push, it's an aesthetic more than actual wealth. They will wear Lacoste or whatever, but like they have one, you know, one Lacoste. But it's more like an outfit and like a political alliance than an actual money thing. And I've sort of always been fascinated by that, you know, but like the meaning of being posh in Spain is very different from like being rich in America, you know. And yeah, I think that was obviously not Planeta.
Of course, part of this is this progression from a performance piece to now performing in the you are an actor, an actress.
Finally put the wig on.
Yes, exactly. You put it back on.
Yes.
And you've called yourself a closeted theater kid.
Yes.
How has the internet helped you come out of the theater closet?
It didn't. I mean, I wouldn't say it was the internet, to be honest. I think it was more like it had to come out in some way. Because, okay, so when I was little, and this is before Fotolog or whatever, or maybe during, but like this was always behind closed doors. Like, I did this thing where like whenever my mom would leave the house and I would be alone for a few hours, like just like completely alone for a few hours, like I would like hear the door close and I would run and like put a costume on and a wig, and I would do all this, like, I know all the songs to the movie Cabaret.
Okay.
And I would just do that in my room with my cat. And then like I would hear the door again and hide it. And it's just like this thing that I did because I liked it.
It's fun.
But the thing is that it's Spain, at least because, okay, I'm sure there's like an elite in Madrid of like people that come from like actor families, whatever. But like where I grew up, we don't have that. Like, and there, we don't have theater in high school. We didn't have that. And like, so there was no outlet for me to do any of that. So it was just like repressing this like weird, like putting a DVD on, like dancing to it. And but then yeah, like it developed in like sort of this, me being more interested in like joining all these like subcultures that were like very queer friendly, and like people were like wearing weird clothes and making their own outfits and weird makeup and stuff, because that was sort of like an outlet for all of that was like within me in secret. Yeah.
What did you learn from working at Crabtree and Evelyn?
That I was meant to be an artist. That I did through a, like during a sort of depressive episode, because I started making money of arts when I was 16 already, because that was like when there still were European money for grants and stuff. So like I got very used to the European style of being an artist in Europe, like, you know, apply for grants with projects and stuff, and like then you get money and like whatever. And I was very good at it. And maybe because I was so good at it, I took it for granted too. You know, I was like, oh, I'm too good at this. Like, I want to be a normal person. And my first year in art school was very disappointing and like very, you know, as I told you, like I
Butting
encountered a
heads
world that
and
nobody knew anything about anything that I was interested in. So like everything that I knew about had no value because I was dealing with people that again didn't even have a email account, you know. So I got a bit depressed, and then I started questioning, why am I in art school? My parents are eccentric. I want to be normal. Like this was like sort of forced onto me, like to be weird. Like, so I had this phase of like, yeah, I got very depressed. I bought a bunch of like really normal clothes, and I was like, I wanted to be like very invisible, and like, and I got a job, and it was the Crabtree and Evelyn during Christmas season on Regent Street, and it was a fucking nightmare. First, obviously, the commute is like forever. London is huge, and it's like snow, and it's just like hard and like whatever. And then like the smell, being autistic, I'm very sensitive to smells, and like you can imagine a store that's like perfume all the time.
all the time.
I didn't know it at the time. I just felt like shit. So like I would end my shift and just like be like have a horrible headache, be home, and like the one day that I was free, I was just like resting in bed and then back to work. And I was like, okay, it's better to write applications.
It was back to the grants pretty quick.
So very quickly I was like, okay, there's something wrong with me. I don't know what it is because I didn't have a diagnosis back then or anything, but I was like, I can't, like, physically I cannot do this. I don't know why. Like everyone else hated the job, but like I seem to have like a very like physical issue with it, you know. And so I was like, I better get back to what I know how to do, which is putting wigs on and like perform for the camera. Yeah.
You share a birthday with the now late David Lynch and Fellini also. What was your relationship with his work?
Well, with his work, I'm not like a huge maybe I'm more of a Fellini fan, but like I'm not like a huge Lynch fan. Of course, I love his movies, but I think I'm more of a fan of like how he lived his life as an artist. And I always liked him for that, especially since I don't know, it seems to be a world of like filmmaking and like directors where like abuse is very normalized, and like especially narcissistic abuse is very normalized. And the fact that he was like a director that liked having fun on set and stuff, that to me means a lot already, because the bar is very low. And yeah, I think it's inspiring to see artists that you can also admire as like human beings. You know, of course, like it's fine to like, you know, separate the art from the artist, whatever, but I'm an artist, so it's cool to see artists that are good and also not a huge piece of shit. You know. Yeah, so I think that's sort of like what I like about him.
You have a new movie out. I believe it premiered at Sundance, Magic Farm.
And Berlinale.
And Berlinale, yes. Starring Chloe Sevigny, Simon Rex, Alex Wolff. What's it about?
Well, it's sort of connected about this whole thing because it's about pretty much a fictionalized version of Vice News that is going to South America chasing a trend, like a music trend, you know, that is bizarre and weird. And like, it's sort of inspired on like something that was very popular with hipsters in probably 2010s and stuff. That you might be interested in this actually, like, because it's still on YouTube. There's this guy called Delfin hasta el fin.
Okay.
Or no, I think Delfin is his name. And he made a very viral song about the Twin Towers with a really crazy music video. And that went viral. And it's a classic thing was like, you know, it's like a very Latin American thing. And it's so strange and so bizarre that, you know, went viral because everyone's like, what the hell is going on? It's a song about the Twin Towers. And all the Spanish hipsters were really into it and like knew the lyrics, and me included. Is him, then there's like the La Tigresa del Oriente is another like very bizarre character. It's like this old lady with a lot of surgeries that is dressed as a tiger. And you know, it's a weird mix between cultura andina, you know, like from the Andes, and that is like sort of like very genuine and like almost naive music made by like pretty much like Native Americans that has that naivete that like translated to like European culture is like funny. So it's like about like, which a lot of the Vice things. It's like that culture of like, let's go to the third world and find something bizarre and like exploit it, and it's funny, whatever. So sort of the film is about them trying to do that, but they're like in the wrong place and it's a mess and stuff. And they decide to like manufacture a trend. But the trend itself, which is like very stupid, it's just like supposedly people wearing gift bows on their heads, is based on a real trend that I experienced in China that didn't last long, which makes it all the more interesting because it's like one thing that like was born then died. And like I was on my way to North Korea and I was in Beijing. This is like 2015, and everyone in Beijing from all ages were wearing a sprout on their heads. And they were selling it in the street, and like, but everyone was wearing it. And I remember asking a lot of people,
"What's up?"
And they were like, "I don't know, it's cute." And that was the end. Like,
that's the answer.
And everyone was just wearing it. Like old ladies, men going to work were wearing sprout. And I was like, this is so fascinating. How like, I don't know who started it. And I became so fascinated by like how sometimes people follow things for no reason without really knowing why they're doing it. And this was obviously a very cute example, but it happens in many other ways that are like way more damaging, where like people are like continually doing it something for no reason without even knowing why, just because everybody else is doing it. So yeah.
What's the thing you'll miss the most about Fotolog?
Not much.
Not much.
My innocence, I think. I don't know. Just like having that.
It's done, and it's okay that it's done.
Yeah, I think like I don't miss anything particular about the platform itself. I think it's more about like that teen excitement of like not really knowing what you're doing and like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing that was cute about it.
Amalia, thank you so much for coming and chatting about this bygone era of social media.
Yes.
When will Magic Farm be out in theaters?
Here in New York, 25th of April. So very soon.
Very soon. Awesome.
Very soon.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.